Hey, Coach. I'm so happy you found us. A couple things. First of all, this is just a small portion of the video that I did. If you want the complete video and you want the handouts that I'm talking about, click down below, wintheseason.com. It's free. You can go check it out, and I think you'll really enjoy it. It's got the video, it's got the handouts, it's got everything you need down below, wintheseason.com. Have a great day.
Well, I think it's a lot of things, but I think it's how you adjust to different situations. And again, I'm a stats teacher. I'm a little bit analytical, so I always like to think about how I'm going to handle specific things inside of the game. And one of them that I'm going to talk about in a second is timeouts. But I think there's lots of like, how are you going to handle timeouts? How are you going to handle halftime? How are you going to handle, the pregame? All of those things I think are adaptive coaching that you have to adapt. We'll talk later about kind of end of game situations and some of the things I do with that. But I think a really important thing is to think about how you're going to handle, like a timeout. Like that is one of the big ones for me is timeouts. One of the other big things I do early in the season is kind of getting when kids get in foul trouble. Something I do to myself is when kids get we play two 18-minute halves. So if someone gets two fouls in the first half, I tend to sit them a pretty long stretch. I do that. That's my adaptive coaching in the sense that it forces me to go to my bench. It forces me to maybe go find a golden nugget that I won't find. Now, does that bench shorten as the season goes on and I literally as a stats teacher get more samples and kind of know what they're able to do? Absolutely. But early I like to use that kind of as a mental thing. All right, you got two fouls. I'm going to sit you. I can put somebody else in. Let's see how I can always put you back in if I need to. But I always think of one of the big ones is I always think of adaptive coaching. I think about timeout. So if you go to the next slide, coach, and I built this, I built this into the handout that I'm going to give you. But I think you got to think about timeouts. How do you organize a timeout? Now I'll talk about that in a second. But why do you take a timeout? You take a timeout to change momentum. You take a timeout to change up something. I don't know about your guys, but my guys aren't very good at changing on the fly. You take a timeout to rest. You take a timeout to sub. You take a timeout. There's lots of injury, maybe to get somebody so you don't have to take them out of the game. There's lots of reasons you have to take a timeout. Um, but I think you have to think about those timeouts. What and how are you going to organize a specific timeout? But before that, we don't take timeouts. And I told the coach this a couple of weeks ago. We don't take timeouts on loose balls because we've thought about this.
Mhm.
If there's a scrum, if there's a loose ball, if a ball is bounding down a bounce and a kid dives for it, our program and our culture says no timeout. We know we're going live. If two guys are diving on the floor for it and one of our guys gets it, we're not taking a timeout. You only get five of them, and they're super valuable. And you have to think about the value of those in the last 2 or 3 minutes of a game. Um, I'll take one once in a while, and I'll take one of those in the last 3 minutes if I think we need it. But I want my bullets, I want my arsenal there at the end to be able to deal with it. And I talk about some of those things in this handout. It's like a 4 or 5 page handout.
That's really big because we're going to talk about momentum later on, but it's kind of like team momentum. But this is like momentum in a game. You want to keep your timeout strategically for certain reasons, maybe towards the end of a game, especially if you're anticipating it being close. And then you have to be. It's kind of like it's. I always looked at it as a philosophy on how I use timeouts.
Yeah, and then here I'm gonna get into the grime here with timeouts. But here's how I'm gonna take a full timeout. We won't go through all this. I'll do this as fast as I can because I know coach has got me on the clock here. But we'll a full timeout. Here's how our full timeouts work. They run to the bench. They have 15 seconds to themselves. Okay, my leader, who also does this at halftime. My leader runs the first probably 3 minutes of the halftime huddle in the half
Mhm.
room when I'm talking to my coaches. They run that. They have full autonomy at that point for those first 15 seconds to talk, to direct, to do whatever they need to do. My leaders do, and I practice that with them. That first 15 seconds, I'm talking to my coaches, and I am talking about what do you know, what do we need to do because The key to this is most coaches go to a timeout and they're talking about the storm, but they're not navigating the storm because you're the captain of the ship.
Yeah.
All right. So don't talk about what we're not doing. We want to give them specifics, and we want to keep those specifics very precise. So when I go into my timeouts, there's two things. The first thing I say and the last thing I say is the exact same thing. Hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to change up from man. We're going to go to 1-3-1, blah, blah, blah. Hey, here's what John's doing to us. We got to do that. And I'm going to say that at the end. I'm going to start the class with it. I'm going to end the class with it, which is a 45-second lesson that I'm giving them. Mm-hmm. In the middle, I will sprinkle other things. But in that timeout, you have to keep it simple. You cannot overdo things. You cannot overdirect. You cannot overdo that. They won't keep it. It will go right over their heads.
Yeah. And I know we're like, and we're really kind of like the mindset is we're in the games now. We're being adaptive to what's going on, but you have to be prepared and practice for all these scenarios as well. So that once you do get in the game, once you do have the timeouts, you can make the changes because you've prepared for them, which is also, it's not, right. It's kind of out of the scope of what we're talking about today,
yeah,
but it's
and we'll also talk about that when we do the end of end of the game
yeah.
situation stuff later, and some of those things that we've already practiced it. And hey, we're going to win and blah, blah. I don't have to sit there, and we'll talk about that and how I diagram it up. But I think adaptive coaching is thinking before it happens. That's what my thought. So
how do you do that when it comes to your players getting in foul trouble? Because we never it's almost like we're not going to get in foul trouble tonight, and then boom, you're in foul trouble. Like, oh, it's not my best player, never gets in foul trouble. Now they're in foul trouble. So what's your thought process going through that throughout a game?
Well, part of it is like part of that science is how I want to get as much time out of them with them playing as hard as they can and as smart as they can. But that's why the adaptive part for me is I'm trying to play other players because we play 18-minute halves.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. High school is 2 18-minute halves. No one can play 18 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So what it also does is it forces me to pull and do some of those adaptive things. Like I have to rest people. My best player, we play 36 minutes. My best player can maybe play 32 minutes, maybe 30 to 32 minutes. That means I got to sit them 4. Mm-hmm. I got to give them some rest. No one plays 40 minutes at the collegiate level at the highest. Nobody does that. Yeah. You need rest. And they have TV timeouts. They have some other things that we don't have at the high school level. But I think some of that stuff is really important as far as adaptive. And then if you go to the next screen, Coach, something I do is I track what's working for us. And I have an assistant coach. I'll give you this sheet too. And we track offenses and defenses and what's working and what's not working so that we can change, and I'm looking at this sheet during the game. I'm definitely looking at it at halftime. Like, oh man, our man offense is not working. We got to adjust this, or we've been running this zone. It's not working. We got to adjust. We have a rule in our program that if someone scores 3 straight times, we're out. If we're playing man and you score 3 straight times, we're going to a zone. Or, if we're running our trap in full court and you score 3 straight, we're out. It's a way for us to kind of change the momentum and change that friction of a high school game, or
even changing the flow, which was the third bullet on the last slide.
Yeah,
I was really kind of curious how quick you were to, hey, we need to make an adjustment. Especially if those are 3 ugly scores in a row, it's like, hey, we've got. It's because that's when a lot of coaches want to call that timeout. And some coaches, I'm like, if I always felt like if my team's well prepared, I'm not calling that timeout yet. But you might have to make a change up defensively, or you might have to shake the guys up a little bit verbally, to kind of wake them up a little bit. So what else? So you track getting 3 stops in a row. Do you try to get a certain amount of 3 stops in a row in a game, like a certain number of those, or?
Right. So yes, that's a good point. So Coach knows me too well. They used to call them kills.
Yeah.
I don't really love that name anymore. So we call them lockdowns. So our goal is to if we get between 5 or 6 lockdowns defensively, we win. Statistically, stats teacher, we have not lost a game in like 15 years when we've gotten I think 6 lockdowns, which means that's 3 stops in a row.
That's 18 possessions. That's 18 possessions too. And those are momentum killers for an offense.
Those are killers.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna. So I didn't even tell coach this. I teach seniors all day, and I've talked to my seniors who are kind of our student section, and I'm gonna get them tracking that, and I'm gonna get them like locked down. So I'm gonna work on that with my student section. Sorry for the
There you
chant.
go. No, I was gonna. That's great. You said it's like I've had to work with my student section too. They were very creative, and I'm like, hey, have you seen Utah State do all this? And I was like trying to give them some ideas and whatnot. That's great.
No, I'm gonna bring them in the gym, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna beat them, and I'm gonna practice, and we're gonna because I don't know if it's post COVID or whatever, but our student section has gotten like the C- level. So we're going to work on
They've been off.
You know what? That's back to adaptive coaching. I wasn't doing that 10 years ago.
And I'm telling you what, this is a little bit bigger than, a little bit more important than I think what you might spend time thinking about. You know, you did lose those seniors. You probably led that stuff during COVID when you had that short season. They weren't able to pass that knowledge down. But I did the same thing where, hey, my student sections at my second, third year started to get, our gym was empty when I first got my varsity job. And then it started to fill up a little bit as we get better and better and better. And then it's like, hey, now let's get the crowd. How can we get the crowd into it? How can we get students to show up to games?
If you win, they will come. If you win, they will come.
Right?
Yeah.
And then when they come, it's like now you're getting, now the basketball game is, it's like the banana baseball games where everyone's excited to be there. Then the young kids are going. The young kids are getting excited. They're starting to see these older players. And now they're wanting to get involved in basketball. This is real program building stuff.
Right. No, I think it is. And it's going to be a hard time to pick the right senior to count 3 in a row. So as a math teacher, I'm a little concerned. But that's a new one we're going to try. So I think that's really big.
All right. Well, let me skip on to the next one.